adventure.
You remember that night?
We are talking Trucker, and this one is directed by Errol Sack. Now, I was sent a screener for this one, and when I first heard it, I thought it sounded a little bit like an old TV movie that I quite enjoy called The Gladiator. No, not the Russell Crowe one. And the story is as follows. We primarily follow a group of kind of young people in the 1980s. And we see them at the beginning of the movie, and a group of them are in this car, and they're being somewhat reckless in their vehicle, and they end up, because of their recklessness, making this truck, or lorry as we call it here in the UK, come off the road and crash. And inside this lorry is the trucker and his family, his wife and 2 children. His wife and 2 children are killed, and the guy, the trucker, is injured, burnt. Not only do these young people not help, they actually sort of urinate on him while he's kind of in pain and stuff like that. So they're pretty, or at least some of them do. And then cut to a year later, and this trucker has recovered with the help of this kind of strange old man, and he wants revenge. And now this group of young people are trying to look for their friend who went missing a year or so previous to this, and they will come face to face with this burnt up trucker. You might actually say he's one ugly mother trucker. Anyway, so let's talk about it. What works in this movie's favour? So I found this movie, it is very much a B movie, and we're going to come on to why I say that. This isn't a film where you could arguably say it's a thought through, intelligent horror movie. It isn't. But one kind of question it does pose is, where would you fall on the side of morality here? Because ultimately this group of young people who are kind of positioned to be the protagonists to a point, or at least some of them, they were in large responsible for the events. They caused this crash. They ultimately caused the death of this trucker's family. So this movie kind of blurs the line between antagonist and protagonist. It's like, who do you kind of root for? As you'd expect with this kind of group of young people, there are a mix of personalities, some of whom are more heinous than others. Others are more altruistic. But even so, this trucker was certainly wronged, and you can kind of understand his need for revenge, but at the same time, does he take it too far by killing people who are not really anything to do with the initial crash? So I found this movie to have some interesting kind of moral dilemmas, really, about, and even as a viewer, who is it you are rooting for necessarily? Because you could arguably say some of these young people totally innocent, but also this trucker has definitely been wronged. So it's maybe I don't think the movie was necessarily thinking about this complex question when it was being made, but nonetheless it's there. So I found that to be quite interesting. I think the movie takes place within this kind of salvage yard for the most part. And I think it's quite a good setting for people kind of be running around in, lots of kind of junk parts of junk and places to kind of hide and stuff. And obviously it feels somewhat isolated. I think our trucker kind of looks a little cool. He's kind of got this almost like a road warrior look. I think the idea being that he's obviously got these severe burns, and so he kind of like is wearing this kind of like face mask and stuff. I mean, it looks a little impractical, if we're being honest, but for aesthetic reasons, he looks kind of quite cool. As I say, you'd be forgiven for thinking he stepped out of a Mad Max film. I do think it looks pretty cool, and he's quite brutal. I was wondering when this film was playing, because after the kind of the year anniversary, we end up with this kind of group of initial kind of friends. I think there was 5 of them initially, and then they end up bringing about like another 5 people So none of these other 5 don't even know about what has happened. So they're completely innocent. And I was wondering if the this trucker would maybe treat them differently. Not really, but you know, it was like, so there's a good amount of kills here, to be honest. And the movie, I don't know if it was deliberate or not, but it doesn't really kind of explain some things. And you could argue on the upside that, you know, it's sort of mysterious, because what is this, in this year that's passed, where this trucker was initially caused to crash, and then his kind of rehabilitation by this crazy old man, what has happened there? We see some odd things, you know, but it kind of think, is he some sort of like cyborg now? What's this crazy old man been doing, you know? So there's a degree of the kind of the unknown there, and which was, you know, makes it kind of fun in a somewhat silly way. So, you know, our characters, our protagonists, this kind of group of young people, there's a good range between sort of despicable, really innocent, and somewhat kind of ambivalent. So I found them to be have a sort of a good range of sort of different sorts of personalities, and some you kind of can clearly root for, and others you can't. And they also kind of quite liked our. It doesn't really lean too much into the 80s aesthetic, but our main guy who was responsible for this crash, this kind of long-haired guy, he looks like a proper 80s rock dude, and I kind of quite like that. So I think he's an ex-wrestler, actually, the guy who plays this kind of, I guess, main bad guy to a degree. There's a reasonable amount of practical gore here. I thought it was relatively well done. It's not an overly gory film, but nonetheless, I kind of found it, you know, to be of a reasonably realistic sort of standard. So let's talk about what doesn't work. I mean, this movie is just plain silly, stupid even, because it just doesn't really make any sense at all. And there's so many examples I could give, really, with this movie. Let me just give you a couple. So, I mean, the reason why our friends are investigating a year after the crash, and they're trying to find, because one of their friends ultimately gets left behind, this kind of group of young people, one of their friends kind of gets left behind and is never seen again. So the presumption is that this trucker and the old man have got him somehow. And they a year later, they're searching for him, and they think that he's just still at this salvage yard. And I'm thinking, what sane person would think this guy's still at this salvage yard? It's just stupid. And then, like, just other things in the movie, like I said, it tries to have this air of like, what's this crazy old man been doing to this trucker? I mean, what has he been doing? It seems like he's been locked up, and then he's passed like meat through this chimney, almost like he's been bred like an animal. It just doesn't make any sense. It's just, I mean, it's just there for something that will be a cool shot, but narratively, it's like, what is it you're doing? So there's just some sort of like crazy things that happen in this movie. Like the trucker seems to know who these like young people are, and bear in mind, I think it's 1985 this is taking place. He's only briefly saw them when he was burning to death, and his family were in this kind of burning wreck, and some of them are even standing up. But somehow he's managed to get photos of all of these individuals, so he knows who to target. And then, how would you know that? How would you even know who these people are? And then, therefore, it begs the question: you clearly know these other people have nothing to do with it. So why target them? If it was just revenge, or that sort of thing, or being a kind of a vigilante, you are targeting innocent people. And again, it just isn't addressed. So the movie just has this kind of like all these sort of logical, and there are more. I don't want to just kind of go peel everything off for you. Suffice to say, there's just lots of sort of silliness to it. The movie also feels like a pretty cheap production at times. The initial crash involving this truck looks very much like a miniature. There is some like quite horrible green screen involving this kind of those in-car views that you get, where obviously they're filming inside a car and have got the green screen in the background. Again, some of these things could have been worked around. I understand that the lorry crash might have been a hard one to do practically and everything, but I think the scene that we got could have been a little better. So there's some kind of cheapness here. The acting is mixed, I have to say. I think our old man, for example, the owner of this salvage yard, is just over the top. Some of their dialogue is kind of quite hokey. It's just a little bit of a silly movie overall. It just doesn't really kind of make much sense. You know, the look of this kind of this trucker as well. I mean, he takes a fair bit of damage through the movie, but he's just like a truck. He's not like some supernatural guy, or he's like some kind of combat veteran or anything like that. He's just like a trucker who has been quite severely injured, and he seems that he's permanently hooked up to an oxygen tank, yet he seems to be able to shrug off a lot of damage to him, shall we say. I don't know. It just ends up being a little bit of a really schlocky, to be honest. This is definitely a movie that you would see on Tubi. I got this as a screener, so I don't know where it's going to end up. But this is really like a Tubi movie. Let me put it like that. Now, it has an element of fun. It has an element of kind of silly, cheesy schlockiness that I think you can watch it. But really, I think this movie, it leaves sense behind. Let me just say that. It just is very, very, very silly. To the point where I think it ends up, it needed to have a little bit more feet on the ground, if I'm completely honest. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts? Please let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.